something important happened in Riyadh, and the biggest mistake you could make is to describe it more dramatically than the facts support, because the facts are already serious enough. A drone attack hit the U.S. Embassy compound in Saudi Arabia's capital. Saudi officials said 2 drones were involved. They said the attack caused a limited fire and material damage. Later reporting said a CIA station inside the embassy compound was among the areas hit. At the same time, officials familiar with the matter said there was no indication that this specific office was deliberately singled out, rather than being struck as part of the broader embassy compound. That distinction matters, and if you're trying to understand what was actually hit in Riyadh, why the story matters, and why careful language is more important than sensational language, that's where we need to start. Because in a moment like this, there are really 2 stories unfolding at once. The first story is the visible one. A U.S. diplomatic compound in one of Washington's most important regional partner countries was struck, causing fire damage, security alerts, and an immediate operational disruption. The second story is the invisible one. When reports say a CIA station inside an embassy was hit, many people instantly imagine a secret bunker, a command center, or some dramatic Hollywood-style intelligence facility. But the reality is usually more bureaucratic, more embedded in normal diplomatic infrastructure, and at the same time, more significant than people realize. So let's slow this down and break it apart carefully. What was actually hit? Based on the reporting now available, the most solid, supportable version is this. The U.S. Embassy compound in Riyadh was hit by 2 drones, according to Saudi Arabia's defense ministry. The strike caused a limited fire and material damage. Later reporting from major outlets said the CIA station at the embassy was hit. Reporting also said there were no known injuries among CIA personnel, and no public indication that the CIA station itself was the intended target, as opposed to the larger compound. That is the confirmed core. Not that Iran found a hidden station with precision, not that a covert command center was deliberately destroyed, not that intelligence operations in Saudi Arabia were eliminated, not that some impossible-to-replace secret facility was definitively singled out. What we can responsibly say is that a U.S. embassy complex was hit, and reporting indicates the CIA station inside that complex was affected. That may sound less dramatic than the viral version of the story, but it is more useful. And more importantly, it is more defensible. Now, why does an embassy even have a CIA station? This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the story. People hear CIA station and imagine something exotic. In practice, a station is the agency's official presence in a particular country, often operating under diplomatic cover inside a U.S. embassy. That does not mean every embassy has the same footprint, the same staffing level, or the same operational role. It also does not mean every part of that work happens in one room with a giant sign on the wall. What it means is that embassies are not just visa offices and diplomatic reception spaces. They are hubs for political reporting, security coordination, liaison relationships, crisis monitoring, and intelligence collection and analysis. In a country as strategically important as Saudi Arabia, that kind of presence is not surprising. It is part of how the United States maintains situational awareness and relationships in a region central to energy markets, military basing, counterterrorism cooperation, and broader Middle East diplomacy. So when a report says the CIA station inside the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was hit, the importance is not that a hidden base was discovered. The importance is that a sensitive part of the American national security presence inside one of its most important regional diplomatic compounds was touched by a live attack. That is serious, even without exaggeration. And it matters for at least 4 reasons. First, it matters symbolically. Embassies are not ordinary buildings. They are sovereign representations of a state's diplomatic presence. When an embassy is attacked, even in a limited way, the symbolism is immediate. It tells the world that the conflict has crossed into diplomatic space, not just military space. It creates headlines not only because of physical damage, but because it sends a message about vulnerability, escalation, and reach. Second, it matters operationally. Even a limited fire and material damage can disrupt work inside a diplomatic compound. Buildings may be closed, access points may change, sensitive areas may need inspection, secure communications may need rerouting, personnel movement may be restricted, routine services can be suspended. In this case, the U.S. mission in Saudi Arabia canceled appointments and warned Americans to avoid the embassy. A separate security alert warned of an imminent missile and UAV threat over Dhahran. Those are not symbolic actions. Those are real operational consequences. Third, it matters from an intelligence perspective. Even if the station itself was not the intended target, any hit on a location associated with intelligence work triggers concern. Damage assessments have to be made, security protocols have to be reviewed, physical and technical vulnerabilities have to be re-examined. Redundancies may exist, and major intelligence services build precisely for that reason, but disruption still matters. Fourth, it matters politically. Saudi Arabia is one of the most important U.S. partners in the region, and Riyadh is not some peripheral outpost. A strike on the U.S. embassy there becomes a question not only about who was hit, but about regional air defenses, diplomatic security, escalation management, and the willingness or ability of partners to contain spillover. That is why this story mattered immediately, even before the CIA detail became public. Now, let's address the most viral version of the claim. Iran's drones found the CIA's hidden station. This is exactly the kind of framing that may perform for clicks and retention, but it is not the best framing if your goal is credibility and channel safety. Why? Because the word found implies intention and precision. It suggests the attacking side specifically identified and selected the CIA station rather than hitting the larger compound and incidentally affecting that area. But the available reporting does not establish that. In fact, the more careful reporting says the opposite. There was no indication that the CIA station itself was the specific target. The word hidden creates another problem. A CIA station inside a U.S. embassy is not hidden in the way viewers are invited to imagine. Its specific internal layout, staffing, and functions are sensitive, yes. But the existence of an intelligence presence inside a major embassy is not some unbelievable secret. Calling it hidden turns a real event into a melodrama. That is exactly the trap you want to avoid. If you are building a durable YouTube channel, the strongest script is not the one that sounds most explosive on first listen. It is the one that keeps viewers locked in because every sentence feels credible, controlled, and worth trusting. So here is the real retention strategy for this story. Tension through uncertainty, not certainty through exaggeration. The most compelling question here is not, did drones hunt down a secret CIA bunker? The compelling question is, when a strike hits an embassy compound and later reporting says a CIA station inside was affected, what does that actually mean, and what does it not mean? That question is both safer and smarter. It allows you to explain the anatomy of the event. Start with the timeline. A drone attack hits the U.S. embassy compound in Riyadh. Saudi officials later say 2 drones were involved and describe the damage as limited, with a fire and material damage to the building. The U.S. mission reacts immediately with closures and security guidance. Then, subsequent reporting reveals that the CIA station within the compound was hit. Another important point appears in the reporting too. There is no indication that this part of the compound was deliberately singled out. That timeline creates a very different picture from the hyper-viral version. Instead of precision strike on hidden CIA site, what you actually have is attack on a diplomatic compound that appears to have affected a sensitive intelligence-related area inside it. Still serious, but different, and that difference matters, because it changes how viewers understand risk. If you tell viewers the CIA station was intentionally targeted and penetrated with precision, you're telling them one story about adversary capability, target selection, and escalation. If you tell them the embassy compound was hit and a CIA station inside it was affected, without evidence that the station itself was specifically targeted, you are telling them a different story, one about the broadening vulnerability of U.S. diplomatic and security infrastructure in the region. That second story is the safer story because it is the better supported story. It also gives you more substance, because then the natural next question becomes, what does this tell us about embassy vulnerability? And the answer is uncomfortable but important. Embassies are hardened. Security planning around them is extensive, but they are still fixed sites. Their locations are known. Their perimeter can be defended, but not made invulnerable. In a drone-heavy threat environment, even a limited damage incident can create outsized strategic consequences, because the point of the strike is not always mass destruction. Sometimes the point is disruption, signaling pressure, or the demonstration that standoff attacks can still reach politically sensitive sites. That is part of why the phrase limited fire and material damage should not lull anyone into thinking the event was trivial. In national security terms, limited can still be strategically meaningful. A small fire at an embassy is not just a maintenance problem. A canceled services day is not just a scheduling issue. A temporary closure is not just inconvenience. A strike that reaches a compound associated with diplomacy and intelligence sends a message far beyond the square footage damaged. At the same time, overreading the event is also a mistake. There's a tendency online to treat every strike on a sensitive facility as proof of total failure. But institutions like the CIA and the State Department do not operate with a single point of failure. They build with compartmentation, backups, secure communications, relocation procedures, and liaison networks. So the most responsible read is neither nothing happened nor everything collapsed. It is that a meaningful disruption occurred at a highly sensitive site, and the exact longer-term operational impact is not fully public. That is the honest position. It is also a stronger position for a long-form script, because honesty gives you room to explore what is known, what is not known, and why those gaps matter. For example, what do we not know? We do not publicly know the full extent of the internal damage. We do not publicly know which specific rooms or systems were affected. We do not publicly know whether any classified areas required emergency response procedures. We do not publicly know whether any ongoing activity had to be relocated. We do not publicly know whether the station was directly aimed at or simply within the damaged footprint. Those unknowns are not weaknesses in your script. They are the center of the story, and if you handle them well, they increase retention because you are guiding the audience through uncertainty instead of pretending certainty where none exists. That is where this story becomes powerful, and in some ways more destabilizing. It means the strike did not need a cinematic reveal. It just needed access to a known target in a high-threat environment. And that tells us something broader about modern conflict. The line between diplomatic space, intelligence space, and regional security space is thinner than many viewers assume. They are physically and politically intertwined. A strike on one node affects the others. When a diplomatic compound is hit, the consequences radiate outward. Diplomacy is disrupted, intelligence posture is reviewed, host nation coordination becomes urgent, and public messaging has to balance reassurance with realism. That is exactly what happened here. Saudi Arabia publicly acknowledged the attack. The damage was characterized as limited. The U.S. mission issued warnings and canceled appointments. Later reporting added the intelligence dimension. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. This was not just some fire at a building. It was a strike on a site where diplomacy, security, and intelligence overlap. That overlap is the real story, and it also explains why you should resist the temptation to turn this into a gotcha script about a secret being exposed, because the deeper significance is structural, not theatrical. It's about the role Riyadh plays. Riyadh is not just another capital on the map. It is central to U.S.-Saudi relations, Gulf security, energy diplomacy, military coordination, and regional messaging. What happens at the U.S. Embassy there is watched not only by Washington and Riyadh, but by other governments across the region and beyond. The hit on that compound resonates because of where it is and what it represents. That is why the story matters, even if the physical damage was limited and even if no CIA personnel were reported injured. Now, there is one more point that careful viewers will appreciate, and it's worth saying directly. Sometimes, in breaking or fast-moving stories, the most viral headline and the most accurate headline are not the same headline. The viral version wants to tell you the attack proved some giant strategic point in a single moment. The accurate version says, here is what is confirmed, here is what is strongly reported, here is what remains unclear, and here's the narrowest, truthful interpretation that still captures why this matters. For a serious YouTube channel, that second approach wins long-term, because viewers eventually learn the difference between a creator who intensifies every ambiguity into a certainty and a creator who can hold tension without lying to them. So if you want the sharpest takeaway from this event, here it is. And what was actually hit in Riyadh was the U.S. Embassy compound. Saudi Arabia said 2 drones struck it, causing a limited fire and material damage. Reporting later said the CIA station inside the embassy was hit as part of that attack. No injuries to CIA personnel were publicly reported. And crucially, the available reporting did not establish that the station itself was the specific intended target. That is the version you can stand behind. It is serious enough, it is clean enough, and it avoids the exact language traps that can make a script look sensational, misleading, or too confident about facts that remain partially obscured. And if you want to understand why the story traveled so fast, it's because it compresses 3 anxieties into one event. The first is the anxiety of diplomatic vulnerability. If an embassy compound can be hit, viewers immediately ask what is still protected. The second is the anxiety of intelligence exposure. When the words CIA station enter the story,